Hello and welcome to the podcast of the damned. I'm your host Ian, and I am flying solo once again today to bring you another Minisode where I talk about the newest releases. The last one we did was the Scream 2022 release, and we made that one a spoiler-free preview. However, today we're going to be talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that was released on Netflix this week. This one is not going to be spoiler-free, so I just want to get that out there straight off the bat. This is not going to be a spoiler-free. There will be spoilers in this episode. After watching the movie a few times, after writing down sort of my thoughts about it, I really want to get some of my thoughts out there, and I just cannot do that without giving some spoilers for the movie, or most of the movie, because some of the points that I have to say are really critically centraled around, actual plot points and spoilers. So there will be spoilers in this episode. But this is just going to be a mini-sode, little brief overview of my thoughts on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If you enjoy this podcast, you want to support us across social media, you can do so on Twitter at Damned Podcast. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and we're on TikTok. Just search for Podcast of the Damned. You can email us your thoughts, podofthedamned@gmail.com. You can email us about any of our previous, future, current episodes, or any questions really that come up in any of our episodes, or any questions that you would just simply like to ask me, and of course my regular co-host Nico as well. You can also support us on Patreon, patreon.com/podofthedamned. Patreon tiers there start from just £1, and everything that we earn goes back into our podcasts and our streams, so your support would be greatly appreciated. That being said, we're not going to hang about, we're going to jump straight into the episode topic, and I'm talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
So Harlow is a ghost town.
We have a vision for this place. All it needs is young blood.
I don't want to live here. This is a chance for people to start fresh somewhere. Somewhere safe.
Hey guys, you should see this.
What are you doing in our house? You really shouldn't be here.
Oh my God.
This is Hardesty.
Sally, I'm afraid your old friend's back.
50 years I've been waiting for this night. Just to see him again.
Who?
Leatherface. Looks like it's you that he wants.
I'm not gonna let him kill you. Fear no evil. Fear no evil.
Try anything and you're canceled, bro.
Oh, fuck.
This movie was released in 2022, was directed by David Blue Garcia, co-produced and co-written by Fede Alvarez, and stars Sarah Yarkin, Elsie Fisher, and Mark Barnum. The IMDb plot is as follows. After nearly 50 years of hiding, Leatherface returns to terrorize a group of idealistic young friends who accidentally disrupt his carefully shielded world in a remote Texas town. So, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This was a fairly highly anticipated movie. Of course, it's the 9th movie now in the franchise, and this is what we would define as what they would call it in Scream anyway, a requel. So it's basically, rebooting the sequel. This is supposed to be a direct sequel to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and foregoing all of the other sequels that we've got, kind of, you know, like Halloween 2018, essentially. I'm giving you a big sigh for a number of reasons, really, because if you take this movie in isolation, and even, like, let's just say forget everything else that goes on, there's lots of good things about this movie. There is lots of good things about this movie, and I will go into some of them. There's some aspects of this movie that I don't hate. There's some aspects of this movie that I really quite like. I don't like this movie, though, and unfortunately, I really do think the writing has let this movie down big time, which really disappoints me, because I'm a big fan of Fede Alvarez's work. I really enjoy the Evil Dead remake. Don't Breathe, I think, was the other one he did, which I really enjoyed as well. But this one, I think the writing, and I know he wasn't the only writer, but the writing really has let this down, because, very briefly, I think, you know, the acting is fine. I have no issues with any of the actors. I have issues with the characters, so I have no issues with the actors. Cinematography for this is probably actually the biggest plus point I can give this movie. I think this is a really pretty looking movie. I think it's got some really cool shots. I think it's got some really beautiful shots as well, and some terrifying imagery. And it's probably the biggest the biggest plus point I can give this movie. If you're in a movie, a slasher film, you're looking for, you know, hard-hitting kills, you're looking for gore, even if you're not looking for that, but, you know, as horror fans, you know, that's what you kind of come to expect. This movie's got it in abundance. Whether you agree with that in comparison to the original or not is a different story, but this movie has got some really great, interesting kills, and some, you know, great effects, and really nothing that I can complain about there either. I have, again, some issues with a couple of the kills, which I'll get into in a little bit. And, you know, I want to... There's parts of this movie that I want to give a little bit of slack to, and again, I'll discuss them in a second. However, the writing has let this movie down so badly, in terms of, we literally do not have, I feel, a character to root for in this film. All of the characters are just, I don't want to say they're awful people, but they're just so unlikable. They're really unlikable. We've got this group that's trying to resurrect a ghost town, and they're so obnoxious. They're so obnoxious. And we immediately aren't able to root for them, because they literally kick an old lady out of her home. You know, they literally antagonize a local, who, you know, obviously we get to learn more about as the movie goes on, at the petrol station, and there's no one to root for. I know we've got Lila, and she's probably the easiest one to root for out of all of the group, but, you know, like, it's just it's really disappointing, because, you know, you've got this group of people, and they you can't root for them. You cannot root for them one little bit. There's so many plot holes in this movie, and that's linking it back to the original as well. So let's talk about it, because obviously, you know, this happens almost 50 years, was it 48 years after the original? And Sally is back. We've got Sally Hardesty is back. I don't understand the need to have Sally back in this movie. I don't think you needed it at all. In fact, I think this would have worked better as just a straight up reboot. Not a requel, not a sequel to the original, a straight up reboot. They're essentially, it feels like they're trying to rip off what Halloween 2018 did, and in more than one way, and they've come up short. Because I think, by and large, I think most people would generally agree that Halloween 2018 is a good film, and of course there'll be those of you out there who disagree with that statement, and there'll be some of you who are listening to this episode who disagree with that statement, but I think it's a good film. It's one of my higher rated films of the franchise, I would say. So, you know, like, there are people out there, and I think they've tried to recapture that here with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I think they've come up way short. The character of Sally is just literally a rip-off 2018 Laurie Strode. There's no reason for her to be in here whatsoever. She makes bad choices. Number one, she has a massive opportunity to just kill Leatherface. You know, she literally has him at gunpoint, and she fannies about trying to get him to remember her name, which, if you are familiar with the original, you will know that at no point in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre did Sally, you know, have his, like, give him his name. Her name, sorry. You know, he will not have known. And it's all based on, you know, Leatherface not being as mentally as capable as the average human being. So, you know, he may not even understand her name. So that whole sequence that we get where she's trying to get him to remember his name, just fucking blow the bugger away. Just blow him away. Because he's not going to remember your name at all. And, you know, you've said you've waited 50 years almost for this moment. You've been hunting him for 50 years. She's not very good at hunting him because he wasn't exactly far away from her. But you've been hunting him for 50 years and you get this opportunity where you come face to face with him and then you blow it like that. Like, way to make yourself just seem like the most incompetent character known to man, which is essentially what she does. And of course, she does then get her comeuppance later in the movie, and I have an issue with her kill. Whilst visually, being chainsawed through the stomach and lifted into the air is visually very, very striking, and then being flung across the street, there's absolutely no way that she would still be alive to the point where she can shoot him again and then give some dying words of advice to Layla later. There's absolutely no way. And I know it's a horror movie, and I know sometimes you've got to suspend your disbelief a little bit, but you know, there's types of movies that allow you to do that, and I don't really feel like this is one of them. I feel like this one was going for sort of heavy realism on the kill front, and then to have that and have that sort of method of death for her to then still be alive for a relatively significant period of time, you know, it definitely took me out of it somewhat, and it's just like, yeah, okay, there's absolutely no way she would be alive whatsoever. One of the other sort of problems I have with this movie is, obviously, as we said, it's almost 50 years since the original. And Leatherface, I don't think at any point in the original is portrayed as someone who is superhuman. Obviously, we know, you know, he has masses of strength. He's very, very strong. But, you know, we know that Jason and Michael and all the other killers, you know, they have superhuman elements to them, and I don't think we know Leatherface is really that. So for him to sort of take some of the abuse that he takes, I mean, he gets run down, he gets a chainsaw to the chin, you know, he takes a lot of abuse, and he takes literally shotgun shots to the body without even flinching. And at this point, we've got to reflect upon the fact of how old he is as well. If he is just a regular human, then, you know, at this point, at the very, very least, I mean, I don't know how old he was supposed to be in the original, but let's just say for a fact he was a relatively young man and he was maybe, I don't know, 20. That would make him almost 70 years old in this film. And so, again, it's all part of that suspension of disbelief for me, because I then start to find it quite difficult to just believe what is going on my screen. And again, I'm going to re-emphasize, I know this is a horror movie. I know you don't need to believe what's going on your screen, but it just takes me out of it. It completely takes me out of it. Here's this old man who's not moving like an old man, but I don't know. Like, there's something about that just doesn't really sit well with me. And the fact of the matter is, going back to that scene where Sally's trying to get him to remember his name, the fact that he doesn't remember her name, like, I like that aspect. I like the fact that he just gets up and walks past her. I don't know why he just walks past her, because he literally has killed everyone else. But, you know, I like the fact that he doesn't remember her name. However, it makes her look like a really, really stupid character. We get some really awesome kills as well. You know, Richter gets his head caved in. We'll get Melody at the end, who gets her head severed by a chainsaw. You know, I think the ending was subpar for me. Really, really subpar. We think the two have escaped, and he just Leatherface smashes the window, pulls Melody out, severs her head with a chainsaw and then taunts Layla with it, and that's it. Then he does the classic sort of Leatherface chainsaw dance, which is very, very brief. I don't think that will have paid enough lip service to the real, true hardcore fans of the franchise. It just felt very subpar and a bit of a letdown to me. It didn't seem to be like an overly creative ending. It's obviously very much sequel bait. However, based on what I've been seeing from around, the internet and other sites and other podcasts and things like that, I don't think there's going to be much clamor for a sequel to this movie. So I think we may be leaving Texas Chainsaw Massacre alone again for a little while before we get another remake. One of the things I did see as a big criticism of this film going around was that it didn't really capture the feel or the atmosphere of the original, and that's something that I want to kind of give this movie a little bit of credit for. I've heard people saying that this movie was too woke and all that sort of standard criticism. Again, I'm going to give this movie credit for, because at the end of the day, 1974 was a long time ago, a very different time, and I don't think it's fair to level at a movie that happened over 50, a reboot of a movie or a sequel of a movie that happened over 50 years ago. I don't think it's fair to level at the new movie that it didn't capture the atmosphere or the feel of that movie, because it's a totally different time, it's a totally different era. There are new inventions and technologies that you have to take into account. There was no mobile phones in the 70s movie, There are mobile phones in this one. That scene on the bus, seems to be a controversial scene that really pissed everyone off, because, the guy's like, oh, do anything and you're cancelled, bro, or something like that. I like how these guys are all threatening to cancel Leatherface, but they're all just the biggest dicks themselves. Anyways, that's by the by. Personally, for me, if Leatherface walks on a bus with a chainsaw going and a mask made of human skin, I'm getting the fuck out of there. I'm not standing about recording him, but of course everyone does. They record him, and I think that's pissed a lot of people off. However, you see it all the time. You see it with tragedies and fights and whatever else happens in the public. The standard-bys, passerbys, whatever you want to call them, they just get their phones out and record, and I felt like that scene was relatively realistic in that sense. And then we get the Bus Massacre, which was nice, it was a nice gory scene, but, it's just, the characters are just so dumb. Really, really dumb, and it was just a bit of a letdown, I think, overall. But, I want to cut this movie that slack, because I just don't think I don't think it was even worth trying to recapture, and I'm using recapture in inverted commas, the feel of the original. I think it would have been a failure also. It's unfortunate that we've gotten this movie, because, I think had this movie just had some better writing, I think, going their own way and having the different feel that we're talking about, they could have made this into something quite successful and quite nice and quite whatever. Because that's also the same with Halloween 2018. That doesn't have the same vibe as 78 has. Michael Myers is so brutal. There's more gore. There's big differences there, and I think they've absolutely tried to emulate that. And unfortunately, it's just been it's been a big failure, really. There's a couple of other things that we could talk about. How does that chainsaw still work after all these years? Surely the oil wouldn't work. It's been 50 years. It gets shot multiple times. And there's lots and lots and lots of little details that I could get into that I'm not going to get into just now. We may review this fully on the podcast down the line, but obviously this is just a mini-sode to give you guys a very brief overview of it, so I'm not going to get into huge amounts of detail about that. It was really nice to see a couple of the actors on our screens. William Hope as the sheriff, Alice Krieg as well as the orphanage owner. I don't know if we ever actually get her name in the movie, but obviously, William Hope we know from Aliens, which was nice to see as Lieutenant Gorman. You've got Alice Krieg, who I probably think would be best known to horror fans for Silent Hill. She's also the Borg Queen in Star Trek, so it's I felt like that they gave some good. I mean, William Hope specifically is not in it for particularly long. Alice Krieg's not in it for very long either, but I thought they both gave good performances. And listen, I thought all the actors and actresses in this movie gave decent performances. I actually liked Mark Barnum as Leatherface. I felt like he really delivered. I actually feel like out of all the TCM movies in the franchise, I think you know, his was possibly one of the better ones. He moved in the right way. You know, he was trying to sort of emulate Gunnar Hansen, but it looked like he was making it his own. I really like the design of the mask. The masks look great as well. There's positives to be had in this movie, but for me, the writing is just so bad that it drags literally everything else down with it, and I cannot give this movie a recommend. I cannot recommend this movie because it's something that I'm unless I'm covering it on the podcast in the main show, it's something that I'm just not going to watch again. I've watched it 3 times now for this review. That is more than enough for me. We'll move on a little bit. We'll just get into a couple of listener opinions and ratings. I'll go through some of the ratings. IMDb scored at 4.9. Metacritic have scored it at 34. Rotten Tomatoes critics 33, Rotten Tomatoes audience 31. Critics consensus: Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't skimp on the gore, but Leatherface may have irrevocably lost his ability to terrify. I still think Leatherface is terrifying. I don't necessarily agree with that. It's just that this movie is not terrifying. The audience consensus: Texas Chainsaw Massacre is gory, but it isn't very scary, and it definitely doesn't help that the story hardly makes any sense. That's also true. We obviously threw it out to you guys, the listeners, see what you thought. MX Bell Morgan says, I got exactly what I wanted from it and enjoyed it for what it was. I enjoyed what they did with certain character which subverted expectations. Jennifer Smith says, fun watch as a standalone slasher flick, but I did not feel like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie in my opinion. It just didn't have that grittiness I've come to love about TCM movies. It was entertaining. I didn't hate it or anything. The kills were awesome for sure. The setting and story just seemed out of place for the franchise, but I get that they wanted to modernize it a bit. Keith James, it was a horrific in my opinion. The gore and kills aside will have people liking it. Excuse me. The gore and kill side will have people liking it, but the script was abysmal with poor characters. Its brazen rip-off of the latest Halloween franchise was laughable too. It's still better than Halloween Kills though. That's not that hard. I'd prefer you dead says the kills were cool if that's all you care about, but the storyline was just Halloween 2018 with millennials being asshats. And the overall tone was off. It just felt like every other slasher on the market. Cat Cavia, I took it as a modern slasher and it did that fine. The gore was there. It blasted all of America's social issues at once, which I think is what a lot of the hate comes from. I understand why classic slasher original horror and true slasher fans had issues with it. And finally, friend of the show, Ren, can we now finally put a fork in the TCM franchise for good? There are 9 films, 2 of which I would consider good, and the others get a mild pass just because it's completely insane. That makes 6 other films, including this one, that are not good to just plain awful. Ever since 1990's Leatherface, the franchise has traded in being scary for simply being gory, and gore only keeps you interested for so long. This latest film might be the worst of them all. This film fails on so many fronts, with a plot as thin as the skin on old Leatherface's mask, nothing is ever fully developed, and leaves plot holes the size of chainsaw gashes. Shoehorning in the idea that this is connected to the original film felt immensely forced. So much so that I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't included in the original script. But some genius at the studio says, what if we did this? And no one told this person no. I'll refrain from the spoilers, but the explanation and subsequent bonehead decisions made with it really served no purpose, and the payoff scene wasn't what I believed the writers producers thought it would be for the audience. The film would have been gained a few points with me if it had just been another reboot. Even then it would still be terrible. 1.5 out of 10. So as you can see, a couple of people are giving it some props, and I feel like I have given it some props for a couple of the things that it did, but the key issue really spoils any hope I have of having any level of enjoyment for this movie, just because it's so central to everything else. I think this is a beautiful film. I think cinematography wise, there's some really, really pretty shots. I like the colors that they use. I think the kills are, some of the kills are awesome. But the writing is so bad. The plot is really thin. There's so many big plot holes, and it does just feel like a Halloween ripoff. So, you know, I cannot recommend this. Obviously, I'm not going to give it a score, but it's a strong not recommend for me. But that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't go watch it and check it out for yourself. Everyone should go watch all films and form your own opinions about it. For me, though, this is just a movie that I would never recommend to someone. So that is going to do it. That is my mini review of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. I'll quickly go through our socials again. If you would like to support us, go to Twitter at Damned Podcast. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and on TikTok at Podcast of the Damned. You can email us at podofthedamned@gmail.com, and you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Pod of the Damned. We'll be back next week with the full crew. We've got friend of the show Boomer coming on to and fellow podcaster now with his show The Podcast in the Woods. He'll be coming on the show, and we're going to be talking about Lost Boys the Tribe. Oh boy, I can't. Another movie that I feel like is going to be a big not recommend for me, but I cannot wait to sink my teeth into it. I can't wait to talk to Nico and to Boomer about that as well. So until then, guys, thank you so much for listening to this. I hope you enjoy the minisodes. Please let me know what you think of them. This is the second one I've done now, so if you would like to hear more of these or less of these or the same amount of these, or you would like me to do minisodes on things that aren't new reviews, let me know. Email me at podofthedamned@gmail.com. And until next week, you all stay spooky out there.